I honestly do not even know where to start with this mess, but I need to get this out because I feel like I'm losing my mind. My whole world turned upside down in just 6 months, and I am still trying to process what happened. I'm 32 female, and my now ex-husband is 34 male. We met in college 12 years ago and married 10 years ago. I thought we had a great marriage. We were best friends, laughed together, supported each other. He studied business while I went through nursing school. After graduation, I worked as a registered nurse while he built a consulting firm. Money was tight, but we lived modestly, saved carefully, made things work. Mark, my ex, always said he came from a middle-class family. His parents had a nice but not extravagant home and seemed comfortable but not wealthy. He rarely spoke about extended family except to complain about his grandfather, who he described as controlling, judgmental, and disapproving of most of the family. According to Mark, his grandfather disliked women working outside the home, which was why Mark said it was pointless for me to try to meet him. In all our years together, his grandfather never came to family events. Mark's parents would excuse his absence by citing age or health. I offered to visit or invite him over, but Mark always dismissed the idea. About 3 years into marriage, we tried for children. After 2 years of no success, doctors told us I had fertility issues and would likely need IVF, which was expensive with slim odds of success. Treatments cost tens of thousands, money we did not have. Mark was supportive, held me when I cried, researched options, suggested loans or adoption. We eventually paused fertility treatments because of cost and threw ourselves into our careers. Around our 7th year, Mark's business grew. He landed big clients, made good money, and we upgraded to a larger apartment. We began talking about buying a house. Then, 2 years ago, Mark started visiting his grandfather regularly as the man's health declined. This surprised me since he had always described their relationship as terrible. He explained he wanted to make peace before it was too late. I offered to go with him, but he said his grandfather would not like having me there. 8 months ago, his grandfather passed away. Mark seemed genuinely sad, and the funeral was small. I attended to support him, but I did not interact much with the extended relatives. 2 months later, Mark began acting distant and moody. He worked late, seemed irritated by small things, and brushed me off when I asked if he was okay. He criticized me over dishes or TV choices, then began making comments about my career and income. This was shocking, as he had always been proud of my nursing career. He also started spending money more freely, buying expensive clothes, electronics, and talking about getting a new car. And when I asked about our budget, he said his business was doing well. 4 months ago, he dropped the bombshell. He wanted a divorce. I was blindsided. He said that since his grandfather's death, he realized he was not happy, that he had been living someone else's life and now wanted freedom to travel and live luxuriously. It felt like he was talking about our marriage as a burden. I begged for counseling, but he refused. He had already decided. The divorce process was awful. He hired a lawyer immediately, pushed for speed, and kept talking about how he was finally going to live the life he always wanted. This confused me because while his business was successful, it did not seem successful enough for the lifestyle he described. Then, during discovery, I learned the truth. Mark had received a massive inheritance from his grandfather, over $2 million. He had gotten it just weeks after the funeral, meaning he had it for months while growing distant and ultimately leaving me. His new spending habits and attitude all made sense. My lawyer explained that in our state, since the inheritance came during the marriage, it was marital property subject to division. Mark was furious I was pursuing part of it. He accused me of being a gold digger. The court disagreed with him and awarded me half the inheritance, plus half our other marital assets. Mark appealed, but lost. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago, and I received my portion of the settlement a few weeks later. I thought that was the end, but 2 weeks ago, Mark showed up at my apartment frantic and angry. He accused me of ruining his life, demanded the money back, and even claimed I had orchestrated the whole thing with his grandfather. I was stunned. I had barely met his grandfather a handful of times. Afterward, I called Mark's mother to see what was going on. That conversation changed everything. She told me through tears about the real conditions of the inheritance. The will stated that Mark's inheritance depended on him remaining married to me for at least 10 years and showing he valued family and relationships over money. The grandfather had been watching how Mark treated me and respected how we had handled financial struggles. But if Mark divorced me for reasons connected to the inheritance or because he felt financially independent, he would forfeit it. In that case, the money would either go to charity, or if the divorce settlement already awarded me part of the inheritance, I would receive that share. The grandfather included this provision to ensure that if Mark failed his test of character, I would be cared for financially. Mark had not been told about these conditions until after the divorce was finalized. He initially received the full inheritance, but once the divorce ended and he lost his legal challenges, the will's terms activated. The estate reclaimed the funds except for the portion already legally awarded to me, which I keep. The irony is staggering. If Mark had remained the caring husband he once was, he would have kept the entire inheritance. Instead, by leaving me when he thought he had financial freedom, he lost everything. Now he calls and texts constantly, alternating between begging me to return the money and accusing me of manipulating everything. He seems to truly believe I knew about the will conditions all along, which is insane because I only learned after the divorce. He is threatening more legal action. I cannot stop thinking about how differently things could have gone. If he had just told me about the inheritance, we could have faced it together. Instead, he saw it as an escape from our marriage. The cruel twist is that I now have enough money to pay for fertility treatments we once could not afford. The thing we wanted most is finally within my reach, but I am alone. Am I responsible for this mess even though I knew nothing about the will? Should I feel guilty for keeping the money Mark believes belongs to him? What do I do about his threats and constant harassment? I never wanted any of this. I just wanted a husband who loved me and a life we could build together. Now I have money I never asked for, no husband, and an ex who is convinced I destroyed him on purpose. Update 1. I can't believe I'm back here so soon, but things have gotten even crazier, and I need to vent before I completely lose it. First, thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. Reading your responses really helped me feel less alone in this situation. A lot of you pointed out that I didn't do anything wrong and that Mark's grandfather sounds like he was pretty wise about human nature. But Mark is absolutely not backing down. If anything, he's gotten worse since our last confrontation. He's been showing up at my workplace, which is incredibly embarrassing and disruptive. Hospital security has had to escort him out twice now. My supervisor pulled me aside yesterday to ask if I needed help with a personal situation, which was mortifying. Mark's latest theory is that I must have been in contact with his grandfather during our marriage without him knowing. He's convinced that I somehow convinced the old man to change his will to benefit me. He keeps demanding that I provide proof of every conversation I ever had with his grandfather and wants to see all my phone records from the past few years. This is completely insane because, like I said, I met his grandfather maybe 3 times total. Each interaction was maybe 10 minutes long and consisted of basic pleasantries. The man barely said 2 words to me any of those times. I finally decided to stop responding to Mark's calls and texts altogether. But that just made him angrier. Now he's enlisted his friends to contact me on his behalf. I've gotten calls from his college buddies and even some of his business associates asking me to do the right thing and return his money. The worst part is how he's spinning the story to these people. Based on the calls I've received, he's telling everyone that I somehow tricked his grandfather into leaving me money and that I'm stealing what rightfully belongs to him. Some of these people know me pretty well from our marriage, so they seem confused about Mark's version of events. But others are completely buying into his narrative. The situation at work has become really uncomfortable too. Word has gotten around about my divorce settlement, and people are treating me differently. Some co-workers are being weird and distant, like they think I'm suddenly too good for them or something. Others keep making comments about how lucky I am to have gotten so much money from my divorce. Nobody seems to understand that this whole situation has been traumatic and that I never wanted any of this to happen. They just see the money and assume I must be thrilled about it. My lawyer has been great through all of this. She's advised me to document every time Mark contacts or harasses me in case we need to file for a restraining order. She's also looking into his threats about taking me back to court and confirmed that he doesn't have any legal grounds to challenge the inheritance distribution. But even though I'm legally protected, the emotional toll is exhausting. I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when Mark is going to show up next or who he's going to turn against me. I've been staying with my sister for the past few days because I don't feel safe at my own apartment. Mark knows where I live and he's already shown up there once. My sister has been incredibly supportive, but I hate that I'm disrupting her family's life because of this mess. My parents called me yesterday, which was the first time I'd spoken to them since my mother told me about the will conditions. They're devastated about what their son has become and how he's been treating me. They apologized profusely and said they never imagined he'd react this way to learning about his grandfather's test. Mark's father told me that his own father had been disappointed by several family members over the years who'd become greedy and selfish when money was involved. The grandfather had designed Mark's inheritance test specifically to avoid creating another situation like that. The irony is that Mark is now doing exactly what his grandfather had feared, becoming obsessed with money and willing to destroy relationships to get it. He's proving every day that his grandfather's assessment of his character was completely accurate. Mark's parents also told me that they've tried talking to him about his behavior, but he's convinced they're all against him now. He apparently accused them of being part of the conspiracy to steal his money, which is completely delusional. I asked Mark's mother if she thought there was any chance he'd eventually calm down and accept the situation. She started crying and said she didn't recognize her own son anymore. She said the money had changed him into someone cruel and paranoid, and she didn't know how to get through to him. I'm starting to think I need to take more drastic steps to protect myself. My lawyer mentioned the possibility of getting a restraining order, and I'm seriously considering it now. I never thought I'd need legal protection from my own ex-husband, but his behavior is becoming more erratic and aggressive. The hardest part is that I keep hoping the old Mark will resurface and we can have a rational conversation about this whole situation. But every interaction we've had proves that he's not interested in hearing my side of things. He's completely convinced that I'm the villain in this story, and nothing I say seems to matter. If anyone has been through something similar or has advice on how to deal with an ex who's become obsessive and threatening, I could really use some guidance. I feel like I'm drowning in all of this and I don't know how to make it stop. Update 2. Holy shit, you guys. I don't even know how to process what happened yesterday. This whole situation just took the most dramatic turn I never could have imagined. I've been staying at my sister's place for the past week because I didn't feel safe at my own apartment with Mark showing up unannounced. Yesterday morning I decided I needed to go back to grab more clothes and personal items. I figured if I went during the day while Mark was at work, it would be safe. My sister came with me just in case. When we got there, everything seemed normal. No sign of Mark or his car. We went up and I started packing. Then we heard voices in the hallway. At first I ignored them, but then I froze. I recognized Mark's voice. He was talking to another man I didn't know, telling him he needed to get into my apartment to look for evidence. He was convinced I had documents proving I'd been in contact with his grandfather. The other man asked whether this was legal, but Mark insisted it was our marital home and he had rights. My sister immediately reached for her phone to call the police, but before she could dial, we heard keys jingling. That's when I realized Mark still had a key from when we were married. I had been meaning to change the locks, but hadn't gotten around to it. The key slid into the lock and I panicked. My sister and I ran into the bedroom. I called 911 while she called building security. I whispered into the phone that my ex-husband was breaking in. Seconds later, the front door opened. Mark and the man, who turned out to be a private investigator, entered and started rummaging through my things. I could hear drawers being opened and furniture moved. Mark sounded completely unhinged, telling the PI that I had been planning this for years and that he just needed to find the proof. Those minutes felt endless. Finally, we heard sirens. Police and building security arrived at the same time. There was shouting, then silence. When we came out, 2 officers were in my living room. Mark sat, handcuffed, on my couch, looking deflated. The PI was cuffed too, looking uncomfortable. The police explained that both were under arrest for breaking and entering and trespassing. Mark, having a key, didn't give him any legal rights since the lease was in my name alone. The private investigator was in even deeper trouble because he knowingly participated in an illegal search. Mark was taken to jail and I went to the station to file more reports about his harassment. The detective who handled my case was professional and compassionate. She said Mark's actions had clearly escalated into stalking and harassment. She urged me to file for a restraining order immediately. But here's where it gets even crazier. While I was at the station, the detective told me someone wanted to speak with me. It was Mark's grandfather's lawyer, the one who had handled the will. Apparently Mark had been harassing him too, demanding to see all the will documents and accusing him of being part of a conspiracy. The lawyer had been growing concerned about Mark's mental state and thought it was time I saw something. He explained that Mark's grandfather had left not only inheritance instructions but also a detailed letter explaining his reasoning. The lawyer was told to give me the letter if Mark's behavior after learning about the will confirmed the grandfather's concerns. Given the recent events, the lawyer felt the conditions had been met. Reading that letter was surreal. The grandfather wrote about how he had admired Mark in the early years of our marriage. He saw him as loving and supportive, especially through our financial struggles, but in later years he became concerned. Mark had begun making comments about feeling held back by money, wondering what life would be like with more wealth, and comparing himself to peers who seemed more successful. These remarks disturbed the grandfather, who feared sudden wealth could bring out selfishness in Mark. That fear was why he created the inheritance test. He wanted to be sure Mark's character could withstand the temptation of money. The letter revealed the grandfather had also been much more aware of our situation than I knew. He knew about our fertility struggles, my career, and how hard I worked. He even asked Mark's parents for regular updates about us. The part that hit me hardest was that the grandfather genuinely hoped Mark would pass. He wanted Mark to remain committed to me and use the inheritance to build a better life for us together. The test wasn't meant as punishment, but as protection. Sadly, Mark had failed in the most dramatic way possible. The lawyer also told me about provisions I hadn't known. If Mark had stayed married to me for the full 10 years and shown good character, he would have received not just $2 million, but an additional trust fund that would have provided income for the rest of our lives. By divorcing me, he didn't just lose the initial inheritance, he lost millions more. Instead, because Mark had proven himself to be exactly who his grandfather feared he might become, I was now the beneficiary of a significant portion of what would have been his legacy. The grandfather had wanted me to know that this was not a punishment against Mark, but a safety net for me. He believed I would use the money responsibly. After hearing all this, I felt both vindicated and sad. It was validating to know that my efforts as a wife had been recognized, but heartbreaking to realize Mark had thrown away not only our marriage, but a future that could have been secure and comfortable. The lawyer explained there were even more protections. The will covered my legal fees if Mark challenged the distribution. It also set aside funds to help me relocate or pay for security if I faced further harassment. When I got home that evening, I felt drained but strangely relieved. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I understood the bigger picture. Mark's behavior, though inexcusable, made more sense when viewed through the lens of what he had lost and how much his greed consumed him. My sister and I talked for hours. She pointed out that Mark's grandfather had created a perfect test of character, one that rewarded genuine love while exposing selfishness. The fact that Mark failed so completely proved his grandfather's instincts had been right. I'm still processing everything, but I am beginning to accept that none of this was my fault. I didn't manipulate anyone or scheme to steal Mark's inheritance. I was simply trying to be a good wife, and someone recognized that. His grandfather valued genuine character over charm, and in the end, that is what protected me. Update 3. I honestly thought the drama was over after Mark got arrested, but apparently this story had one more twist. I'm still shaking as I write this, but I need to get it out before I can process what happened today. Mark spent 2 nights in jail after breaking into my apartment. He was released on bail yesterday morning, and I hoped maybe that experience would shock him back to reality. My lawyer had already filed for a restraining order based on his harassment and the break-in, but it had not been approved yet. This morning, I was at work trying to focus on patience and return to normal life. For once, I was having a decent day and my co-workers were treating me normally again. Around lunch, hospital security called, saying someone was in the lobby demanding to see me and refusing to leave. My heart sank, convinced it was Mark. When I got to the lobby, it was not Mark, but his mother. She looked awful, crying and shaking, and grabbed my hands immediately. She begged me to sit with her for a few minutes because she had something urgent to tell me. In a quiet corner, she revealed something that made my blood run cold. After Mark's release, he had gone to his parents' house in a rage, ranting about betrayal and claiming the family had conspired against him with his grandfather. In the middle of this rant, he let slip details about his visits with his grandfather that his parents had never heard. Apparently, during one of those final visits, Mark's grandfather had tried to warn him about the conditions of the will. He expressed concern that money might change Mark and suggested he think carefully about his priorities in marriage. Instead of taking this as a warning, Mark had seen it as proof that his grandfather wanted to control him. He became angry, telling his grandfather no one had the right to dictate his life or how he spent his money. Mark's mother said that in his rage yesterday, Mark admitted he had already been planning to divorce me before his grandfather even died. The inheritance had not caused the divorce. It had simply given him the means to act on a plan he had already made. The revelation devastated me. All the times I wondered what I had done wrong or how to save my marriage, Mark had already checked out. She went on to explain that after Mark confessed this, his father finally lost his temper. He told Mark he was ashamed of the man his son had become, and that his grandfather had been right to test his character. He accused Mark of proving himself selfish and obsessed with money. According to his mother, this confrontation sent Mark spiraling further. He began ranting that he would make everyone pay and that I would not get away with stealing his life. She came to warn me because she was terrified Mark was planning something dangerous. I immediately called my lawyer and the detective who had handled Mark's arrest. The detective said his threats and escalating behavior were very concerning. She told me to stay somewhere safe while they tried to locate him. I called my sister, who insisted I come stay with her again. I got coverage for the rest of my shift, and she picked me up. As we drove, my phone started buzzing with texts from an unknown number. They were from Mark, and they were completely unhinged. He accused me of turning his parents against him and destroying his family. He wrote that I would regret what I had done and promised to expose me as the person who had ruined his life. The text became more erratic and threatening, some barely coherent strings of accusations. My sister immediately called 911 while I forwarded the text to the detective and my lawyer. Police put a BOLO alert for Mark and promised increased patrols near my apartment and my sister's house. About an hour later, Mark's mother called again, sobbing so hard I could barely understand. She said police had found Mark on a bridge about 30 miles away. A passerby saw him standing on the edge and called 911. When police arrived, he was shouting about being abandoned and losing everything. They managed to talk him down, but he had what appeared to be a complete breakdown. He was taken to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Hearing about his suicide attempt hit me in a way I did not expect. Even after everything, I did not want him to hurt himself. Somewhere inside the angry, destructive man was the husband I once loved. Mark's mother apologized again and again for what he had put me through. She said she and his father felt guilty for not getting him help sooner. I reassured her it was not their fault. They had warned me when they thought I was in danger and were as much victims of his breakdown as I was. The detective updated me later that evening. Mark would be held for psychiatric evaluation for at least 72 hours, possibly longer. My restraining order had been approved and would remain in place regardless of his mental health status. She also said that given his condition, it was unlikely he would pursue his legal threats anytime soon. If he were released, there would likely be strict conditions preventing him from contacting me. I feel emotionally drained. In less than a week, I went from fearing Mark to pitying him to worrying about his safety. Reconciling the man who broke into my apartment and threatened me with the man who nearly ended his life is almost impossible. My therapist reminded me that it is normal to feel conflicted when someone is both an aggressor and a victim. She said I can feel compassion for his struggles while still protecting myself from his harm. What is hardest to accept is that the man I married is truly gone. This is not just a stressed version of him. His values and personality changed when money entered the picture. His grandfather's test exposed who he really was, and sadly he failed. Now I'm left with the inheritance money, which sits largely untouched except for legal fees and living expenses. For the first time, I'm thinking about what I want to do with it. Part of me wants to use it for the fertility treatments Mark and I once dreamed of. Even as a single parent, the idea of having a child is still important to me. The irony that his failure could give me the family we wanted is not lost on me. I'm also considering going back to school to become a nurse practitioner, something I always wanted but could never afford. Mark used to criticize me for not advancing my career, never acknowledging how his financial choices had held us back. More than anything, I want to honor what I believe his grandfather intended. He valued character and using resources to help others. I am considering setting up a scholarship for nursing students or contributing to organizations that help couples with infertility struggles. Today, the detective updated me again. Mark was diagnosed with severe adjustment disorder, with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, triggered by losing the inheritance and facing consequences. He will likely remain in psychiatric care for several weeks. His parents have stepped in to manage his business affairs while he focuses on recovery. The detective told me that Mark cycles between blaming others in anger and blaming himself in despair. With treatment, there is hope he may gain perspective. I hope he does, not because I want him back, but because I hate to see anyone suffer this way. His mother continues to check in with me, though I feel conflicted. She and his father are devastated by who he has become, but I also need distance from them to move forward. My sister has been my rock, giving me a safe place to stay and reminding me of things I had not considered. Last night she pointed out that Mark's grandfather gave me more than money. He gave me validation. For years I worried I was failing as a wife because of our struggles. But his grandfather saw me as the one with true character. Realizing that has been healing. I now see the inheritance as an opportunity to build the life I want. For 10 years, my choices were shaped around what Mark and I could afford or his business needs. Now I have the freedom to decide based on what makes me happy. It is both terrifying and exciting. I'm 32, with unexpected wealth, no husband, and a blank slate for my future. Mark likely sees this as the greatest injustice, convinced I stole what was his. The truth is, I earned it through 10 years of loyalty, support, and sacrifice. He was the one who threw it away. Mark's grandfather knew that wealth is not just money, but character in how you use it. Mark failed, but maybe I can still pass. I do not know what the future holds, but for the first time in months, I am looking forward to finding out. I gained financial security, self-knowledge, and freedom, while Mark lost everything. His grandfather was right. The most valuable inheritance is character. I never expected to inherit it from someone else's family, but perhaps that is the greatest gift of all. Stay tuned for more stories from Our Girl Relationships.